If the coldest man in the empire refused to smile, then ruining his composure would become my sacred duty. That was the thought that carried me down the cathedral aisle while 300 nobles watched me approach my future husband as though I were walking toward an execution instead of a wedding. Adrian Cross stood beneath a ceiling painted with silver stars, dressed in black from collar to boots, his pale face calm enough to make marble seem emotional. People called him the Winter Duke, the Silent Sword, and, when they believed he could not hear them, the man without a heart. I called him inconveniently handsome. His dark hair was combed neatly back, his blue eyes were colder than the snow gathering outside, and his gloved hands rested at his sides with perfect control. Not one nervous movement, not one uncertain breath. Honestly, it was insulting. I had spent the entire morning being pinned into ceremonial clothes, lectured about obedience, and reminded that my family's future depended on this marriage. Adrian merely looked as if he had arrived early for a business meeting. When I reached him, the priest began speaking about duty, loyalty, and the eternal bond between two noble houses. Adrian watched me with the grave focus of a man reviewing military reports. I smiled. He did not. Challenge accepted. When the priest asked whether Adrian accepted me as his lawful husband, Adrian answered, "I do," in a voice so steady that several candles seemed embarrassed for flickering. Then it was my turn. I should have repeated the approved words. I should have lowered my eyes, acted grateful, and remembered every warning my father had whispered before the doors opened. Instead, I looked directly at Adrian and said, "I do," though I reserve the right to improve his personality. A shocked silence rolled through the cathedral. Somewhere behind me, my mother made a sound like a teacup cracking. Adrian's expression remained unchanged, but his right thumb pressed once against the seam of his glove. There it was, a crack so small no one else would have noticed. I nearly laughed with triumph. The priest rushed through the final blessing and announced that tradition required a kiss. Adrian leaned toward me with the careful reluctance of a man approaching an unfamiliar animal. "A brief one," he murmured. Naturally, I whispered. Then I caught the front of his coat, rose onto my toes, and kissed the corner of his mouth instead of the center. It was light, harmless, and entirely improper. Adrian froze. Beneath our feet, a thin line of frost raced across the polished stone, curling around our shoes like silver ivy. The guests gasped, but I barely heard them. Adrian stared at me, and for the first time, his perfect composure was gone. Not broken exactly. Awakened. The wedding ring on my finger grew warm, glowing faintly against my skin. Adrian covered my hand with his, hiding the light from the crowd. His voice dropped so only I could hear. "You have no idea what you just awakened." I smiled up at my terrifying new husband. "Then I suppose our marriage will not be boring." By the time our carriage reached the northern palace, I had learned 3 things about Adrian Cross. First, he could remain silent for 47 consecutive miles. Second, he considered looking out a window a complete social activity. Third, the faint glow beneath my wedding ring disappeared whenever he moved more than a few feet away from me. I tested that last discovery several times by leaning toward the opposite door. Each time, the ring cooled. Each time I shifted closer, warmth returned. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything and reacted to nothing, which was becoming deeply irritating. The palace rose from the snowy hills like an enormous gray crown, beautiful in the same way thunderstorms were beautiful when viewed from somewhere safe. Rows of servants waited beneath the front arch. No one smiled. Even the horses seemed professionally serious. Adrian stepped from the carriage and offered me his gloved hand. "Careful," he said. "The stones are icy." "Concern already? We have been married less than a day." His gaze remained fixed on the steps. "I would prefer not to explain to the court that my husband injured himself before dinner." So romantic. His fingers tightened around mine for half a second. Victory number 2. Inside, the palace was warm but painfully quiet. Every clock ticked too loudly. Every servant moved as if laughter had been outlawed by royal decree. Adrian led me through halls lined with portraits of stern ancestors who all appeared disappointed in me personally. My rooms were elegant, spacious, and located at the opposite end of the residence from his. I looked at the distance between our doors and placed a hand over my heart. Cruel. Abandoned on my wedding night. Adrian did not blink. "You will be comfortable here." Comfortable is not the same as cherished. His jaw shifted. Victory number 3. He dismissed the servants and faced me with the solemn expression of a judge preparing a sentence. There are 3 rules. Only 3? I expected a handbook. You will not interfere with matters of state. Naturally. You will not enter my private rooms. Of course. And you will not touch me in public without warning. I folded my hands behind my back, presenting my most innocent smile. Your boundaries are completely safe with me. Adrian studied my face for so long that I wondered whether he could hear the lie forming its own heartbeat. Elliot. Adrian. I mean it. So do I. He left without another word. 10 minutes later, I found the council chamber, sat in his enormous chair, replaced his untouched black tea with hot chocolate, and instructed a bewildered servant to place a white flower beside his documents. Adrian entered with 6 officers behind him and stopped. His eyes moved from me to the drink, then to the flower. The room became so quiet I could hear snow tapping the windows. You broke the first rule, he said. Technically, I am not interfering. I am improving morale. You entered a restricted room. That was not one of the 3 rules. One officer coughed into his fist, suspiciously close to laughter. Adrian slowly removed the flower from his papers. I expected him to discard it. Instead, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. That evening, curiosity led me down an unlit corridor behind the library, where I discovered a narrow door hidden beneath a tapestry. My ring warmed as I approached. The room beyond was filled with hundreds of preserved white flowers, each one identical to the bloom Adrian had kept. Then the door closed behind me, and his quiet voice filled the darkness. You were not supposed to find this. Adrian did not sound angry, which somehow made being caught in his secret room worse. He stood between me and the door, one hand resting against the dark wood, his expression composed while hundreds of white flowers watched us like silent witnesses. I was looking for the library, I said. The library has books. That explains why this room felt unusual. His gaze moved to my glowing ring, then returned to my face. You should leave. I stepped closer to the nearest table. Each flower had been preserved beneath clear glass, their pale petals untouched by time. Why keep so many of the same kind? They are ordinary flowers. You hid ordinary flowers behind a locked door. Adrian opened the door without answering. His refusal should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made the mystery settle into my mind and unpack its belongings. Over the following week, I began noticing something stranger. Whenever Adrian almost smiled, Winter reacted. The first time happened at breakfast when I informed him that his ancestors looked like men who had been personally offended by soup. The corner of his mouth moved. Frost immediately traced the rim of his coffee cup. The second time, I placed a small white cat in his council chair. Adrian stared at the animal, and the animal stared back with equal authority. His eyes softened for one brief second. Every window in the room fogged at once. By the third incident, I was conducting an investigation. You are watching me, Adrian said as we prepared for the Palace Winter Festival. I am admiring you. You have been admiring the same button on my coat for 5 minutes. It is an excellent button. His thumb pressed against his glove. A tiny crystal of ice formed on the silver clasp. I smiled, but uneasiness stirred beneath my triumph. That evening, the palace gardens glowed beneath thousands of lanterns. Musicians played beside a frozen fountain while nobles moved across the dance floor in dark coats and bright silk. Adrian intended to stand at the edge of the celebration looking dignified and miserable. I refused to allow it. Dance with me, I said. No, that was suspiciously fast. I do not dance. You command armies, manage an empire, and frighten grown men into correcting their posture. I believe you can survive 3 minutes of music. Every nearby conversation grew quieter. Adrian looked at the watching court, then at my offered hand. Finally, he placed his gloved palm against mine. 3 minutes. He moved with precise restraint, guiding me through the crowd as though dancing were another duty he had mastered in secret. I deliberately stepped the wrong way. You are doing that on purpose, he murmured. Prove it. I turned too quickly, nearly losing my balance, and Adrian caught me by the waist. For one suspended moment, his face changed. His eyes warmed. His mouth curved. The fountain behind us froze solid in an instant, its falling water captured in the air like glass ribbons. Gasps swept through the garden. Adrian released me and backed away, horror replacing the softness in his eyes. Frost spread beneath his boots, racing across the stone path and climbing the nearby hedges. Everyone else retreated. I moved toward him. "Stay back," he said, his voice no longer steady. "Adrian, are you hurt?" He stared at me as if I had spoken a language he had forgotten. The frost stopped inches from my shoes. My ring burned warm against my hand, and beneath the music, the whispers, and the trembling winter air, I heard Adrian Cross take one frightened breath. The festival ended without music, laughter, or another word from Adrian. By morning, the court had agreed to call the frozen fountain an unusual weather event, which was impressive considering the sky had been perfectly clear. Adrian avoided me for 3 days. Then duty trapped us together more effectively than any marriage vow could. A winter storm closed the mountain road while we were returning from a village inspection, forcing our small party to shelter in an old watchtower several miles from the palace. The tower had one usable room, one narrow bed, and a fireplace that seemed personally offended by warmth. Adrian immediately placed his coat across the mattress. "You will sleep there." I looked at the wooden chair beside the window. "And you will spend the night pretending furniture is comfortable? I have slept in worse places. That does not make this place better." He removed his gloves and set them carefully beside the fire. Without them, his hands looked almost unfamiliar, pale and marked by thin silver lines that disappeared beneath his sleeves. I wanted to ask about them. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and watched him stare through the window at the storm. Snow struck the glass in soft bursts, filling the silence he preferred and I usually destroyed. "I will not tell anyone what happened in the garden," I said. "They already saw it. They saw ice. I saw fear." Adrian went still. "You should be afraid." "I am afraid of many things. Formal dinners. Silent breakfasts. Your collection of depressing portraits." His mouth almost moved, but he stopped it. The room grew colder anyway. "Do not make light of this, Elliot." "I am not." That surprised both of us. I folded my hands in my lap. "I am trying to understand why everyone stepped away from you when you were the one who looked frightened." Adrian turned back to the storm. "Understanding me is not your responsibility. You made it my responsibility when you married me." He said nothing after that. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of his breathing. Adrian was still in the chair, but his composure had vanished. His brow was drawn tight, his hands gripping the armrests while frost spread across the floor beneath him. "Mother," he whispered. The word was so young and broken that I forgot every clever thing I had ever planned to say. I crossed the room slowly. The cold sharpened around me, but my ring warmed with each step. "Adrian." His eyes opened, unfocused and bright with panic. Ice climbed the window frame. "Do not touch me." I lowered myself onto the floor beside him. "All right." I placed my hand palm up on the rug between us, close enough to reach, but not close enough to trap him. "I will stay here." For several breaths, nothing happened. Then his bare hand moved. His fingertips hovered above mine, trembling once, before settling carefully against my palm. The frost stopped. Warmth returned in a slow circle around us. Adrian looked down at our joined hands as though they belonged to strangers. "You did this before," he said quietly. "Before what?" His fingers tightened around mine. Outside, the storm softened against the glass. "Before you knew my name," he whispered. "This is not the first time you saved me." For several seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Adrian Cross, the man who treated emotion like a dangerous substance, was still holding my hand, as if letting go might erase the past. "I think I would remember saving the most intimidating man in the Empire," I said. "You were 14. His thumb moved once across my knuckles, barely there, yet warm enough to make the cold room feel smaller. "And you were 17, although you looked younger because you were soaked, shivering, and arguing with a tree." A memory stirred. Rain. A forest road. A boy collapsed beneath white blossoms. I had assumed he was a lost traveler wearing clothes far too expensive for wandering alone. "You refused to tell me your name," I whispered. Adrian nodded. I could not control the curse then. I believed fear would trigger it again. The silver lines along his hands caught the firelight, and suddenly I understood that they were not scars from battle. They were traces of winter trapped beneath his skin. "I gave you my scarf. A red one." His voice softened around the words. "You wrapped it around my shoulders, sat beside me, and complained about the rain until I stopped shaking. The memory returned all at once. I had talked for nearly an hour because silence had seemed to frighten him. Before leaving, I had placed a white flower beside him and said that even winter had to end eventually. To me, it had been one strange afternoon. To Adrian, it had become a secret room filled with preserved proof. The flowers, I said. His gaze lowered. I searched for the same kind every spring. My heart performed an undignified little stumble. You remembered me for 10 years. I remembered everything. Dawn arrived slowly, turning the storm beyond the window from black to silver. When the road cleared, we returned to the palace, but the distance between us had changed. It was not gone. Adrian still walked 3 careful steps ahead of me, still wore his gloves, still spoke as though every sentence required official approval. Yet I noticed him looking back to make certain I was there. That evening, he brought me to the hidden room. In daylight, the flowers seemed less like a mystery and more like a promise he had been keeping alone. At the center stood a glass case containing a faded red scarf. You chose this marriage, I said. It was not a question. Adrian stood beside me, his reflection pale in the glass. Your family believed the proposal came from the Imperial Council. But it came from you. Yes. My chest tightened with something too large for humor, but humor was still the only shield I trusted. So the coldest man in the Empire secretly arranged to marry the boy who once insulted a rainstorm. You also insulted my horse. It looked judgmental. Adrian almost smiled. The room cooled, but no frost appeared. Why did you not tell me? I asked. His expression grew still again, though not empty. Never empty now. Because gratitude is not love, Elliot. I wanted you beside me, but I would not ask you to return feelings you did not choose. He reached for the glass case, then stopped before touching it. Wanting you was already selfish enough. I stepped closer until only a few inches remained between us. Then it is fortunate that I have always appreciated selfish honesty. His eyes lifted to mine. For the first time, I was not trying to disturb his composure. That realization frightened me more than the curse ever had, because somewhere between the cathedral, the frozen garden, and this room of white flowers, his feelings had stopped being my game. They had become mine. The next morning, I made the worst decision of my married life. I decided to behave. No teasing at breakfast. No stealing Adrian's gloves. No appearing in the council chamber with hot chocolate and opinions. I even moved my books into the eastern rooms, telling the servants that His Grace deserved peace. By noon, the entire palace felt wrong. By dinner, Adrian looked personally offended by silence. He sat across from me at the long table, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable, and his untouched tea cooling beside his hand. You have not spoken for 7 minutes, he said. I was told restraint is admirable. Not on you. I looked down at my plate before he could see how easily those 3 words reached me. I'm trying to make things easier. For whom? I had no answer that would not sound like fear. After learning what his emotions could do, every joke felt dangerous. Every smile I drew from him felt like a match held too close to dry paper. So I kept my distance. Adrian responded by destroying it. He began appearing in the library without explanation, sitting across from me while pretending to read the same page for 20 minutes. He brought hot chocolate to my room, though he claimed the kitchen had made too much. He waited outside the chapel after morning service, then walked beside me, so closely our sleeves brushed. None of it was dramatic. That made it worse. Adrian's affection arrived in quiet, careful pieces, and I had no armor for any of them. 3 days later, Victor Hale visited the palace. He was charming in the polished, exhausting way of men who believed every room improved when they entered it. During dinner, he complimented my code, my manners, and finally my patience. Marriage to Adrian must require a heroic amount, he said with a smile. Before I could answer, Adrian set down his glass. My husband's patience is not your concern. The words silenced the table. My husband, not Elliot. Not a political obligation. My husband. Victor only smiled wider. At the winter reception that evening, he asked me to dance. I accepted because refusing would have caused more gossip than agreeing. Adrian watched from across the room, still as stone, but frost formed along the stem of his glass. Victor leaned closer. You seem to enjoy making him jealous. I did not know he could be jealous. Neither did the Empire. When the music ended, Adrian was suddenly beside us. His hand settled at my back, firm but careful. The next dance is mine, he said. There is no next dance, I reminded him. There is now. He led me away before Victor could respond. In the quiet corridor beyond the ballroom, Adrian stopped and turned to me. Why are you avoiding me? I am not. You moved your rooms. You wanted distance. I wanted control. His voice lowered. I never said I wanted a life without you. My breath caught. Adrian lifted one hand and touched the edge of my collar, adjusting it with unnecessary precision. His fingers lingered near my jaw. The air between us tightened, warm despite the snow outside. He leaned closer, slowly enough that I could stop him. I almost let him continue. Then I remembered the frozen fountain and turned my face away. Adrian went still. Was ruining my composure only amusing? He asked quietly. When you believed I had no heart? The question struck harder than anger would have. Adrian stood inches away, his hand still hovering near my collar, while the music continued behind the closed ballroom doors as though the world had not shifted beneath us. No, I said. It stopped being amusing when I realized I could hurt you. His expression changed by the smallest degree. You think distance protects me? I saw the garden. I saw what happened when you almost smiled. And I saw you walk toward me when everyone else stepped back. His voice was quiet, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Do not decide what I can survive without asking me. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him that losing control frightened me only because losing him frightened me more. Before I could, the ballroom doors opened. Victor Hale stood there with 2 imperial officers and a sealed bundle of letters in his hand. His pleasant smile had disappeared. Your Grace, he said, the council requires your immediate attention. An hour later, I stood in the council chamber beneath the stares of 12 nobles while Victor arranged the letters across the table. Each carried my family seal. Each described palace schedules, private entrances, and instructions for weakening Adrian's authority. The final letter bore my name. The signature looked exactly like mine. These are false, I said. An expected answer, Victor replied. Adrian sat at the head of the table, motionless behind a wall of perfect composure. He did not look at me. That hurt more than the accusations. My family may be ambitious, I continued, but I have never seen these letters. Victor turned to Adrian. The safety of the empire cannot depend upon affection. Frost appeared along the edge of the table. Adrian closed his gloved hand, and it vanished. Then he finally looked at me. His eyes were cold enough to convince every person in the room except me. I had seen the man beneath that expression. I knew how much effort the mask required. Still, when he spoke, my certainty cracked. Elliot Hayes will be confined to the Eastern Tower until the investigation is complete. Silence followed. I waited for some hidden reassurance, one softened glance, anything. Adrian gave me nothing. The officers escorted me from the chamber, while whispers followed us through the palace. By sunset, I was alone in a circular room high above the snowy courtyard, wondering whether I had mistaken memory for devotion and careful kindness for love. A servant brought dinner, but would not meet my eyes. Beneath the covered tray lay one black glove. Adrian's glove. My hands shook as I lifted it. A narrow strip of paper had been tucked inside. Trust the man beneath the title. Relief arrived so suddenly that I laughed, then nearly cried, which felt excessive even for me. Adrian had not abandoned me. The arrest was part of his plan. Victor believed he had divided us, and Adrian intended to let him keep believing it. I turned the note over. 3 more words waited on the back. Leave before midnight. At that exact moment, the lock clicked from the outside. A strange orange light flickered beneath the door. Smoke curled into the room, thin at first, then steadily darkening, and I realized Victor had never intended to wait for a trial. Smoke gathered beneath the ceiling while the locked door refused to move. Panic would have been reasonable. Unfortunately, panic had never been my most useful talent. I wrapped Adrian's glove around my hand, crossed to the narrow window, and discovered a maintenance ledge barely wider than my boot. Excellent, I muttered. A sensible escape designed by someone who hated guests. The drop to the courtyard was impossible, but the ledge curved toward a lower balcony. I climbed through the window, pressed my back against the cold stone, and moved one careful step at a time while snow stung my face. My wedding ring grew warmer with every foot, guiding me toward Adrian like a small, determined compass. I reached the balcony just as servants rushed into the tower behind me. Relief lasted 3 seconds. Victor stood inside the adjoining hall, calm and perfectly dressed, as though attempted treason required excellent tailoring. "You continue to be inconvenient," he said. "My husband says the same thing with considerably more affection." His smile tightened. Guards loyal to him surrounded the corridor, leaving no safe path except forward. Victor escorted me to the Great Hall, where the Imperial Council had gathered beneath towering windows. Adrian stood at the foot of the throne. His expression was composed, but frost covered the floor around his boots. When he saw the smoke on my coat, something in his face broke. Not anger. Fear. Raw, helpless fear. The temperature dropped so quickly that every breath became visible. Victor stepped beside me and raised a ceremonial dagger, holding it near my shoulder without touching me. "One emotional mistake," he announced, "and the Empire will finally see what its protector truly is." Ice climbed the pillars. The chandeliers trembled. Nobles backed toward the walls. Adrian did not move. "Let him go," he said, but his voice sounded strained, almost unfamiliar. Victor smiled. "Control yourself, Your Grace." That was the trap. Adrian had spent his entire life believing control was the only thing separating love from disaster. I looked at the frost spreading toward me and understood that he was not losing himself because he hated Victor. He was losing himself because he loved me. "Adrian," I called. His eyes found mine. "Stay where you are," he said. "That has never been my strongest skill." I stepped away from Victor before anyone could react and walked across the frozen floor. The cold pressed through my shoes, but my ring burned brighter. "Elliot, stop." "No." The frost reached my feet and halted. Adrian's hands were shaking. "I cannot control it." "Then do not." His face went pale. I moved closer. "Feel all of it. The fear, the anger, the ridiculous affection you keep hiding behind gloves and rules." The air cracked with cold, but I continued until I stood directly before him. I placed my palm against the center of his chest. His heartbeat raced beneath my hand. "I am still here." For one suspended moment, the entire hall held its breath. Then the ice beneath us softened into shining water. Frost slipped from the pillars in harmless silver mist. Adrian stared at me, stunned, while warmth spread outward from my ring and through his coat. His hands closed around mine, bare skin against bare skin. Behind us, Victor's confidence vanished as the council guard stepped forward and took the false letters from him. Adrian did not even look away from me. "You could have been lost," he whispered. But I was not. His forehead lowered gently toward mine. The coldest man in the Empire stood before his entire court with fear still visible in his eyes, and for once, he made no attempt to hide it. 3 weeks after Victor Hale was removed from the council, the Empire held another wedding for us. The first had been a contract witnessed by frightened nobles. The second was our choice. Morning sunlight poured through the cathedral windows, turning the silver stars above us gold. And this time no one looked at me as though I were walking toward disaster. Adrian waited at the altar without gloves. That small detail caused more whispers than the ceremony itself. The thin silver lines remained across his hands, but the trapped winter beneath them was gone. When I reached him, he took my fingers openly, skin against skin, and warmth moved through our rings. "You are staring," he murmured. "I am admiring your excellent decision to arrive. I was here first. Marriage has already made you competitive." The corner of his mouth curved. Nothing froze. The priest paused, clearly distracted by the sight of Adrian Cross almost smiling in public. I understood the feeling. For years, the Empire had mistaken his silence for emptiness. I had made the same mistake, only with considerably more confidence and worse. Manners. When the vows began, Adrian did not speak about duty, titles, or noble houses. "I chose you before you remembered me," he said, his voice steady but no longer cold. "I chose you selfishly, hoping that having you near might make the world feel less empty. I will not keep you through law, gratitude, or fear. Stay only because you wish to." My practiced response disappeared. Apparently, ruining his composure had made mine unreliable as well. "I stayed when you gave me 3 rules," I said. "I stayed through silent breakfasts, frozen fountains, and the most judgmental collection of family portraits in the Empire. I believe my commitment has been thoroughly demonstrated." Laughter moved through the cathedral. Adrian's eyes softened. "Elliot, I choose you," I said, quieter now. "Not the title, not the legend. You." The bells rang when we kissed, and this time the stone beneath us remained warm. Life after that did not become perfectly peaceful. I would have found that suspicious. Adrian still woke before sunrise, organized his papers by importance, and believed tea should taste like regret. I continued entering rooms without permission, rearranging his schedules, and bringing white cats into official meetings. The difference was that he no longer pretended to dislike it. Months later, during a crowded council session, I sat on the arm of his chair while ministers debated trade routes with the seriousness of people discussing the fate of civilization. Adrian was attempting to appear attentive. I leaned close and whispered that his oldest ancestor in the portrait behind us looked exactly like an offended goose. Adrian made a strange sound. The room fell silent. Then he laughed, not a restrained breath or an almost smile. A real laugh, warm and surprised, as though it had been waiting inside him for years and had finally discovered the door. Every minister stared. Outside, snow drifted gently past the windows, but not a single thing turned to ice. Adrian looked at me without embarrassment and threaded his fingers through mine. I had once believed breaking his composure would be my life's greatest achievement. I had been wrong. Making him feel safe enough to stop needing it was far better.